All right, hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Leviticus chapter 19. One of the interesting things about this chapter is God is going to give us, I think, some moral laws. These are commands. And so when we talk about the Mosaic law, Israel was commanded to live by these laws, which they failed. And I said in the last study, the reason why Israel could never live up to these laws is because we are sinners by birth. We're born in sin. Our nature is to sin. So the law was never designed to give life. What the law does is establish what is right. In other words, we can, when we say, well, what is right and wrong? And then you can say, why is it right and wrong? Let's kind of step back and say, let's go back to the first two commandments. One, love God. And then two, love one another. And remember, the entire law is really explaining that, breaking those two commandments down. So we come back to the first 10 commandments, right? The 10 commandments is the breakdown of the first two, and then the other 613 commandments is further explanation of the 10 commandments. So we're going to see some things in this chapter here that is, again, kind of established. It gives us a guide. What is right and why? So Leviticus chapter 19. So it says the Lord spoke to Moses. Make sure I got, okay. All right. The Lord spoke to Moses, speak to the entire Israelite community and tell them, be holy because I am, be holy, be holy because I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. Now, remember, who is he talking to? The Israelites. They were a nation that was created from the seed of Abraham, and they were to be set apart from all of the other nations. The other nations happen to be pagan, wicked, sinful, beyond belief. He says, each of you is to respect his mother and father. You are to keep my Sabbaths. I am Yahweh your God. Do not turn to idols or make cast images of gods for yourself. I am Yahweh your God. So we're going to see, this is how this chapter is going to unfold. He's going to give commands, reiterating the 10 commandments that he's already spoken. Obviously, the images, making cast images, the golden calf, right? Oh, they're not too far from that. Okay, you have to keep the Sabbaths, and then he says, don't make. And then he says you have to respect your mother and father. Verse 5: when you offer a fellowship offering to the Lord, sacrifice it so that it may be accepted. The proper way of offering it. The priests are to offer it, and according to the commandments and ordinances that God has given. It is to be eaten on the day you sacrificed it, or on the next day, but what remains on the third day must be burned up. If any is eaten on the third day, it is repulsive things. It is not to be accepted. Anyone who eats it will bear the punishment, for he has profaned what is holy to the Lord. That person must be cut off from the people. So that's how they were to eat the offering. When you reap the harvest of your land, you are not to reap the very edge of the field, gather the gleanings of your harvest. Now this is called gleaning. And it's kind of interesting here. Notice it. Verse 10, you must not strip your vineyards bare or gather its fallen grapes. Leave them for the poor and the foreign resident. I am Yahweh your God. This is an interesting command here because greed wealthy people are greedy, sinfully greedy, and they would not care about the poor, and therefore they would reap every inch they possibly could. We have people, look at the wealthy today. Okay, what God is saying here is leave some of it, in other words, the stuff that maybe fall off. Okay, so as people would go through whatever, if a piece of corn, an apple, or a grape, whatever, if it falls off, leave it, don't. And then you should leave even the edges of it. And in the sense here, it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. One, you're being charitable, right? You're being benevolent. God is telling the owners of the field, this is how you ought to treat your neighbor. And then two, the poor, this was God's way also of providing for the poor. You can even say it was a sort of welfare system. And this is why I'm saying this, that they were to come in, the poor were to come and glean from it. I think there's a lot that could be said about that. In other words, first and foremost, the owners, leave it for them, and then the poor, you had to go and work and get it. That's my dig at the welfare system. The welfare system, the way man operates today, the way the government operates today, is just horrible. Verse 11, you must not steal, you must not act deceptively or lie to one another, right? So a lie, deceive, right? You must not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Yahweh. Now again, we see these standards here of what is right. Right? So one, you must not steal. Two, you must not act deceptively or lie. Right? He said, verse 13, you must not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages due a hired hand must not remain with you until morning. In other words, don't put it like this, don't withhold, he says. Think about that. Don't withhold the wages. Wealthy people will do that if they could. Verse 14. You must not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind, but you are to fear God. I am Yahweh. Now, just keep this in mind. This is for everyone, adults as well. You oftentimes would think this is for children who would do this, right? Curse the deaf people, right? Standing behind a deaf person and, cursing them, and then, or putting a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Grown people do this just as well, right? He said, don't do it. Verse 15, you must not act unjustly when deciding a case. Do not be partial to the poor and give preference to the rich. Judge your neighbor fairly. That's all we can ask for, right? That's what's right, what's fair. You must not go about spreading slander among your people. You must not jeopardize your neighbor's life. I am Yahweh. So just again, these are just things you say, well, what determines right and wrong? You must not harbor hatred against your brother. You must now again, don't hate, right? Rebuke your neighbor directly, and you will not incur guilt because of him. Do not take vengeance. Now let me just say this. Notice he said rebuke your neighbor directly. If your neighbor does something wrong with you, don't hide it, don't harbor it. For some reason, we have this idea that we shouldn't even mention it. No, he said, look, if somebody offends you, does something wrong, notice he says rebuke them, confront them directly. Don't gossip about it, and don't even harbor ill will, right? He said deal with it. Verse 18, do not take revenge or bear a grudge against members of your community, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. Verse 19, you are to keep my statutes. You must not crossbreed two different kinds of your livestock. Sow your fields with two kinds of seed, or put a garment made of two kinds of material. So this was, don't mix. And by the way, this was the only kind of mixing, breeding that is kind of referred to here. not racial. I just want to throw that in there. Verse 20, if a man has sexual intercourse with a woman who is a slave designated for another man, but she has not been redeemed or given her freedom, there must be punishment. They may not be, they are not to be put to death because she has not been freed. Now, there's one of these again. Why? Can't give you all the answer to this. I'm just going to keep it moving here. In terms of laws to the slaves, slaves had no rights, and God is not giving them rights here in this context. Okay. Verse 21, however, he must bring a ram as his restitution offering to the Lord at the entrance of the tent of the meeting. The priest will make atonement on his behalf because the Lord with the ram of restitution offering for the sin he has committed, and he will be forgiven for the sin he has committed. Okay. When you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, you are to consider the fruit forbidden. It will be forbidden to you for 3 years. It is not to be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit must be consecrated as a praise offering to the Lord. But in the 5th year, you may eat it as a fruit. In this way, its yield will increase for you. I am Yahweh your God. Now, of course, we wouldn't go by this. A farmer wouldn't go by any of this because, well, we just wouldn't. But also remember this too. God was also present in this nation. Okay, so keep that in mind. You're not to eat anything with blood in it. You are not to practice divination or sorcery. Now, what is interesting about this, first of all, we understand not to, we covered the blood, eating of blood. Okay, don't you just tell me you were to drain the blood completely. What is interesting about this, you are not to practice divination or sorcery. It is interesting about this. On the one hand, when we say sorcery or divination, Moloch, for example, was not a real god, but demons behind Moloch was. So we can't see that. So when people would pray and do these divinations and these kind of awful, detestable practices, they were doing them to Moloch. You remember when Moses offered a sacrifice, and I'm sorry, when Moses went before Pharaoh and he threw his staff down, Pharaoh's magicians were able to do the same, and they were able to do it up to a certain point. Verse 27, you are not to cut off the hair at the sides of your head or mar the edges of your beard. Now, by the way, this wasn't talking about trimming or even styles, but these were pagan practices here. Verse 28, you are not to make gashes on your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. I am Yahweh. Again, we're not gonna, if you are a person who loves to get tattoos and stuff, in and of itself, is it wrong to get a tattoo? No. The tattoos here, there's a couple of things that he's saying here. Tattoos for paganism, the cutting of your body, cutting. There are people who have this physical disorder of cutting. The problem here is that people would make gashes for the gods or the pagan gods. Some of these people today who are just making gashes, have some mental issues. All right. Verse 29, do not debase your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will be prostituted and filled with depravity. In other words, don't put your daughters out there. But it's not there are people who do some of this even today. Mostly drug addicts. You must keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. Verse 31, do not turn to mediums or consult spiritualists. And that's exactly what you see a lot of these people along They go to spiritualism, even though they're fake. Notice this: do not turn to them or consult them, or you will be defied by them. I am Yahweh, your God. Okay, now in some cases, there may be some demon activity involved with some of them, but most of what we see on the television, they're fake, but they still should be denounced as fakes, but also denounced as ungodly. Verse 32, you are to rise in the presence of an elderly and honor the old. Fear your God. I am the Lord. So this is again, notice he says, hey, rise, give them respect. When a foreigner lives with you in the land, you must not oppress him. You must regard the foreigner who lives with you as the native born among you. In other words, don't mistreat him. You are to love him as yourself, for you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh your God. It is amazing how today, when you look at the immigration attitudes, what I'm dealing with, from Christians, by the way, no doubt, okay? And keep this in mind, that a foreigner who has denounced their pagan ways and came to live with Israel. Again, two examples of that in scriptures is Rahab and Ruth, the two great examples of foreigners who are living among them, who embrace the God of Abraham, and that's the difference here. You must not treat them as enemies. Verse 35. Excuse me. You must not be unfair in measurements in length, weight, or volume. Now, if you ever go to the marketplaces and you see the balancing scales, he says don't tip them. People do. I often wonder I know in some cases gas stations used to cheat, right? Especially the old ones, Some of the new ones may be a little harder to do it, but a gas station would be a good example of this too. That you go to the gas station, are we really getting gallons of water? I mean, gas. So if you're getting 10 gallons, is it really 10 gallons for that price? He's saying don't mess with the weights, don't mess with the measurements. Verse 36, you ought to have honest balance, honest weights, and honest dry measures, and honest liquid measures. I am Yahweh your Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You must keep all my statutes and all of my ordinances, and do them. I am Yahweh. So in other words, be fair. And these were for Israel. Unfortunately, in our case, we live in a land where we are not guided by God, and there's a lot of cheating going on with people today, and that's unfortunate. If we were living under God's command, I'm talking about even here in America, it is not a godly nation as people pretend. But I'm not going to get off into that. But this was Israel. The standard of right. In other words, if you want to say, how do I say what is right and what is wrong? This is just an example of this, right? This is a good example of what is right. That's basically what he's saying here. What is right? All right, guys, see you in chapter 20 in the next study. I will see you then.